The year is 1997. The world is mesmerized by a chess match. IBM's supercomputer, Deep Blue, is facing off against reigning world chess champion Garry Kasparov. In our timeline, Deep Blue famously wins, a monumental achievement for artificial intelligence, proving a machine could outthink the greatest human chess player. This event, seemingly niche, ignited the public imagination about AI's potential, paving the way for future breakthroughs in machine learning and complex problem-solving. But what if, at this pivotal moment, Deep Blue hadn't just lost decisively, but suffered a series of spectacular public failures that completely derailed public and scientific confidence in AI for decades? What if the early promise of artificial intelligence spectacularly imploded? Our point of divergence takes us to that iconic chess match in '97. Imagine this. Deep Blue doesn't just make mistakes, its moves look like the chaotic flailings of a panicked player. Instead of the expected hum from its processors, an unsettling clanking fills the air, heralding an inevitable collapse. It consistently makes inexplicable errors, calculates absurd blunders, and ultimately loses to Kasparov in a humiliating sweep. Deep Blue doesn't just fail to win. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the game at a high level. Perhaps a critical flaw in its algorithms, a hardware malfunction that goes uncorrected, or even an unforeseen environmental factor causes its performance to be dramatically worse than expected. The much-hyped thinking machine turns out to be a sophisticated, yet ultimately flawed, calculator. The atmosphere in the room that day would be electric, but with a different current running through it. Kasparov's initial intense focus would slowly morph into a bewildered amusement, a slight smirk playing on his lips as Deep Blue made yet another inexplicable move, perhaps moving a rook into a capture without any defensive reasoning, or sacrificing a queen for no gain. The IBM team, usually stoic, would be visibly squirming, their faces paling with each digital blunder. Their carefully prepared victory speeches would remain crumpled in their pockets. They'd frantically try to diagnose the issue in real time, only to be met with unresponsive systems and cascading error messages flashing on their monitors. This wasn't a minor glitch. It was a systemic meltdown, perhaps even a memory leak so severe it crippled Deep Blue's ability to hold its chess knowledge, turning a grand master into a novice. The sight of the powerful machine seemingly confused or panicked would be deeply unsettling, yet also morbidly fascinating to the assembled press. Reporters, poised to write headlines about a new era, would furiously rewrite them, their pens scratching out triumph and scrawling in fiasco. The crowd, initially buzzing with anticipation, quickly descends into murmurs of disappointment, then open laughter and mockery. Imagine the sound bites: Deep Blue, more like Deep Flop, or man beats machine, brain beats bytes. The media narrative isn't about AI's potential, but its profound limitations and the hubris of its creators. The subsequent press conferences would be a bloodbath, with IBM executives trying to spin the disaster, only to be met with skeptical glares and scathing questions. What went wrong? Was this just an elaborate hoax? Is this the future you promised us? The scientific community, which had held its breath for a validation of decades of research, would reel. Researchers who had dedicated their lives to AI would face public ridicule, their life's work dismissed as a pipe dream, their academic careers potentially derailed. The immediate impact is a massive loss of public and scientific confidence in artificial intelligence. This wasn't just a setback, it was a devastating blow. Funding for AI research, especially for projects aiming at complex, human-like intelligence, dries up dramatically. Venture capitalists, who had eyed the field with nascent interest, would immediately pull out, seeing no viable returns on such a publicly flawed technology. The once exciting field of intelligent systems would be tainted. Government grants would dwindle, diverted to more practical computing endeavors, like network security, data storage, or the burgeoning field of e-commerce infrastructure. Politicians, quick to distance themselves from perceived failures, would cite the Deep Blue debacle as proof of AI's unreliability. Research labs, once vibrant hubs of speculative innovation, would face massive budget cuts. Their grand ambitions for truly intelligent machines would be put on indefinite hold, their supercomputers repurposed for mundane tasks or sold off. Many talented minds, disheartened and seeing no clear career path in a discredited field, would pivot. Imagine the brilliant young PhD students, once dreaming of creating conscious machines, now reluctantly accepting jobs optimizing database queries or designing e-commerce websites. Some might shift towards pure computer science, focusing on hardware optimization or network infrastructure. Others would gravitate towards the burgeoning dot-com bubble, drawn by the allure of quick riches in a less abstract, more immediately commercial sector. This exodus of talent would further cripple AI's prospects for generations, as a whole cohort of brilliant engineers and scientists would be lost to the field, and a new generation would be actively dissuaded from entering it altogether. Conferences on AI would shrink to small, niche gatherings of true believers, ostracized by the mainstream scientific community. The term AI researcher might even become a pejorative, synonymous with impracticality, or even outright charlatanism. Technologically, the path of computing diverges sharply. Without the clear public and commercial validation provided by Deep Blue's victory, the AI winter, a period of reduced funding and interest, would not be a temporary chill. It would become a prolonged deep freeze. Machine learning, neural networks, and deep learning, the very engines of AI's astonishing resurgence in the 21st century in our timeline, languish in academic obscurity. They might still be researched in isolated university departments or niche military projects, but without the intense focus, significant funding, and public recognition that propelled them forward, their progress would be agonizingly slow, confined to theoretical papers rather than real-world applications. The breakthroughs that sparked the current AI revolution, such as the ImageNet moment or the advent of powerful GPUs for parallel processing, might still happen eventually, but decades later, without the driving force of widespread investment and fierce competition. Instead, the computing world focuses heavily on raw processing power, data storage, and network speed. The emphasis would be on building bigger, faster, more robust infrastructure for the burgeoning internet, rather than on imbuing it with intelligence. Companies would pour resources into developing more efficient database systems, high-bandwidth communication protocols, and ever smaller, more powerful general-purpose processors. Human-computer interaction, HCI, would evolve, but along different lines. Instead of intuitive, AI-driven interfaces, there would be a focus on highly efficient graphical user interfaces, GUIs, advanced keyboard shortcuts, and perhaps even specialized hardware controllers, designed for human speed and precision rather than machine interpretation. Virtual reality might gain more traction as a pure display technology, lacking the AI-driven immersion we're beginning to see today. The digital world would feel far more manual. Machines that think? Only a distant dream. Software development would become an even more human-intensive task, relying on highly skilled programmers for every line of code, every decision logic. Automated code generation, smart debuggers, or intelligent IDEs would be rudimentary at best, lacking any true understanding. This would mean slower development cycles for complex software and potentially more bugs, as human error would not be mitigated by AI-powered tools. The rise of DevOps and agile methodologies might be accelerated in an effort to manually manage this complexity. Cybersecurity, in particular, would see massive investments, becoming a dominant field. Without AI to automatically detect and respond to threats, human analysts and meticulously crafted rule-based systems would be the frontline defense against a constantly evolving landscape of digital attacks. These profound technological shifts would, of course, fundamentally alter the internet, which was then just gaining momentum. Consequently, without the widespread adoption of AI-powered technologies, our daily lives would feel far more manual, less intuitive, and decidedly less smart. Imagine a world where the convenience and personalization we take for granted simply don't exist. No personalized recommendations. Your streaming services wouldn't suggest shows you might like, based on your viewing history, Instead, you'd browse through vast libraries sorted by genre or popularity, perhaps relying on human-curated staff picks or old-fashioned word of mouth. E-commerce sites wouldn't intelligently recommend products based on past purchases or browse. Your shopping experience would be more akin to browse a physical catalog or a less intuitive website, relying on manual search and editorial curation. Discovery would be a far more laborious and less curated experience. Online advertising would remain primitive, targeting broad demographics rather than individual users, far less effective and pervasive than today. Content providers would rely heavily on human editors and critics, word of mouth, and trending topic lists, often leading to slower adoption of new trends. No intelligent voice assistants. Siri, Alexa, and Google Assistant would remain firmly in the realm of science fiction. Our interactions with technology would be far less intuitive and conversational. You'd be typing commands, clicking through menus, and performing actions manually. Voice control might exist in rudimentary forms, perhaps for basic appliance functions, like on-off, but certainly not for complex information retrieval, scheduling, or smart home control. The idea of talking to a computer for anything beyond basic commands would seem absurd, almost childish. Human-computer interaction would be about clarity of instruction, not natural language understanding, limited facial recognition, and autonomous systems. The widespread adoption of these technologies would be virtually non-existent. Security systems would rely on older, less efficient methods like manual monitoring, keycard access, and human guards. Biometric identification would be limited to fingerprint scanners, largely eschewing more complex analysis. Self-driving cars would be a distant, almost unimaginable dream, confined to highly specialized, experimental labs, perhaps funded by desperate military programs rather than commercial ventures. Logistics and manufacturing might still automate, but through rigid, rule-based programming rather than adaptive learning algorithms. Drones might exist, but as remote-controlled vehicles for surveillance or specific deliveries. Not intelligent, autonomous agents, capable of navigating complex, unpredictable airspace. Less effective search engines and social media. Search results would be far less sophisticated, relying heavily on basic keyword matching, rather than complex algorithms understanding context, intent, or semantic relationships. This means more irrelevant results and a longer search process. Think of the early days of the internet, where finding specific information was often a frustrating exercise in trial and error. Search engine optimization, SEO, would be a much simpler keyword stuffing game. Social media feeds would lack the highly curated, AI-driven stickiness that keeps users engaged today. Feeds might be purely chronological or rely on very basic filtering, leading to a less addictive and perhaps less pervasive online experience. The viral nature of content would be determined more by human sharing networks and media attention than algorithmic amplification, relying on word-of-mouth, manual sharing, and traditional news cycles. The social media platforms themselves might be simpler, more akin to digital bulletin boards or chat forums, lacking the deep personalization and engagement hooks we see today. The digital world would feel far more manual. Machines that think, only a distant dream. Beyond consumer technology, the ripple effects would spread to critical industries, fundamentally altering their development trajectories and the pace of innovation. Healthcare, medical diagnostics would remain primarily in the hands of human doctors, without AI assistance for pattern recognition in medical images, personalized treatment recommendations, or accelerated drug discovery. Doctors would rely more heavily on their accumulated experience, textbooks, and peer consultation. Research would be significantly slower, requiring more manual analysis of massive biological datasets, prolonging the development of new treatments and therapies. Precision medicine, tailored to individual genetic profiles, would be far off, if not entirely stalled, due to the sheer data analysis challenge. Complex surgeries would not benefit from AI-powered robotic assistance, relying solely on human skill and traditional instrumentation, meaning longer recovery times and higher risks for certain procedures. Telemedicine would develop, but primarily as a video conferencing tool, without AI-driven symptom checkers or diagnostic support. Finance. Industries like finance would rely more heavily on human analysts and simpler algorithmic trading models. High-frequency trading as we know it, driven by complex AI analyzing market fluctuations in milliseconds, would not exist. Financial markets might be less volatile, but also less efficient, with fewer opportunities for rapid gains or losses. Fraud detection would be more challenging, relying on rules-based systems easily circumvented by sophisticated criminals. Human intuition, deep institutional knowledge, and extensive manual auditing would remain paramount. The rise of fintech would be stunted, as many innovative financial products rely on complex AI for risk assessment and personalization. Scientific research. Fields like astrophysics, genomics, materials science, and climate modeling, which today heavily rely on AI to process vast datasets and identify subtle patterns, would progress at a much slower pace. Analyzing telescope data for new exoplanets, predicting weather patterns with high accuracy, or understanding complex genetic interactions would remain incredibly labor-intensive, often overwhelming human capacity. Major breakthroughs requiring the processing of petabytes of data would be far rarer. The big data revolution would be more about storage and access, less about intelligent analysis. Climate models would be less granular and predictive, hindering effective policymaking. Drug discovery would be slower, without AI to screen molecules or predict protein folding. Instead, brute force experimentation and traditional statistical methods would prevail. Robotics and manufacturing. While industrial automation would continue, the dream of truly intelligent, adaptable robots capable of navigating complex, unpredictable environments or interacting naturally with humans would be deferred indefinitely. Robots would remain largely confined to caged environments, performing repetitive tasks with high precision but no flexibility. Factories would still be highly automated, but less adaptable to changing product lines or unforeseen issues, requiring more human intervention for reprogramming and maintenance. The widespread adoption of collaborative robots, or cobots, that work alongside humans safely would be decades away if it happened at all. Labor disputes over automation might still occur, but the fear would be of simple machines replacing jobs, not thinking machines. Energy and infrastructure. Smart grids, optimized by AI to balance supply and demand, predict outages, and integrate renewable energy sources, would not exist. Energy distribution would be less efficient, leading to higher costs and potentially more blackouts. Predictive maintenance for critical infrastructure like bridges, pipelines, and power plants would rely on scheduled inspections and human analysis, rather than AI models identifying potential failures before they occur. Urban planning would lack AI for traffic flow optimization, public transport scheduling, or smart city development, relying instead on traditional models and human observation. Education. Personalized learning platforms, AI tutors, and adaptive learning software would be absent. Education would remain largely standardized, relying on traditional classroom settings and human teachers to identify individual learning needs. The potential for AI to democratize access to education and tailor content to diverse learners would remain untapped. Teachers would spend more time on administrative tasks and grading, rather than focusing on individualized instruction. Massive open online courses, MOOCs, might still emerge, but without AI to personalize the learning path, their effectiveness might be limited to highly motivated learners. Agriculture. Precision farming, which uses AI to optimize irrigation, fertilization, and pest control based on real-time data, would not exist. Farmers would rely on traditional methods, leading to less efficient resource use and potentially lower yields. Crop disease detection would be slower and more reliant on human inspection. The food tech revolution would be less about AI-driven vertical farms and more about traditional biotechnological advancements. Food supply chains would be less optimized, potentially leading to more waste and higher prices. This prolonged AI winter would also have profound geopolitical implications. Military strategy would remain rooted in traditional intelligence gathering and human analysis, lacking the predictive power or autonomous capabilities that AI offers today. The arms race would focus on conventional weaponry, stealth technology, and advanced materials science, rather than AI-driven systems. Cyber warfare would exist, but without AI-driven offensive and defensive systems, it might be less sophisticated, relying more on human-coded exploits and manual intervention, like the early days of hacking. Nations would compete over raw computing power and network security, but not AI superiority. The global power balance might shift differently. Nations that in our timeline invested heavily in AI, like China and the United States, might instead focus on other tech sectors, or even find their global standing less dramatically impacted by technological prowess. International relations would lack the AI diplomacy or surveillance capabilities that exist today. Intelligence gathering would rely more on human spies, satellite imagery interpretation by human analysts, and traditional signals intelligence. The ethical debates around autonomous weapons systems would largely remain theoretical, lacking the real-world pressures of development. Space exploration might also be impacted. Missions requiring complex autonomous systems for deep space probes or planetary rovers would be more difficult, relying on slower, human-controlled operations and simplified mission designs. The dream of self-replicating probes or AI-driven space habitats would remain purely science fiction. The focus would be on manned missions and robust, long-duration, human-controlled systems. Economically, the lack of widespread AI integration would mean slower productivity growth in many sectors. While other innovations in hardware and networking would drive some economic expansion, the transformative, efficiency-boosting impact of AI across diverse industries would be absent. Economic growth would be more gradual, perhaps less prone to the rapid boom and bust cycles driven by speculative tech bubbles. Labor markets would evolve differently too. Without the widespread automation of routine tasks by AI, some jobs might persist longer, particularly in white-collar sectors that are being rapidly automated in our timeline, e.g., data entry, basic legal research, customer service. However, without the creation of entirely new AI-driven industries, overall job growth could be different, potentially slower in high-tech sectors. The fear of robots taking our jobs would largely remain a distant concern, replaced by fears of global competition, economic stagnation, or traditional labor market shifts driven by outsourcing or globalization. The skills gap would be different, focusing on human analytical skills, complex problem-solving without algorithmic shortcuts, and traditional craft. This could lead to a resurgence in the value of human artisanship and specialized manual labor. Culturally, the public's perception of smart technology would remain rooted in automation and rule-based systems. The idea of machines that could genuinely learn or think would be seen as a futuristic fantasy, or perhaps even a cautionary tale of human hubris. Science fiction would likely reflect this skepticism, portraying AI as either simplistic tools or, in more dystopian visions, as dangerous due to their inherent limitations or unpredictable flaws rather than their potential for superintelligence. The fear wouldn't be Skynet becoming self-aware, but rather a critical system failing due to a subtle, undiagnosed bug, or a complex automated system making a catastrophic error because it couldn't adapt. This might lead to a greater emphasis on robust, verifiable code and human oversight rather than trusting black box algorithms. Humanity might develop a collective distrust of any technology marketed as intelligent, leading to stricter regulations and a more conservative approach to technological advancement. The very concept of technological singularity would be relegated to fringe theoretical discussions rather than a mainstream concern. Perhaps society would embrace more analog, less digitally integrated forms of life, valuing human connection and manual skills more highly. The societal anxieties we see today around AI ethics, job displacement by intelligent machines, or algorithmic bias would simply not exist, replaced by concerns more familiar to the late 20th century. Privacy concerns would revolve more around massive data collection and human surveillance, rather than AI inference. Art and entertainment would also diverge. Special effects in movies might rely more on practical effects, advanced CGI without AI-driven animation, or innovative camera work. Video games would be less procedurally generated, with more handcrafted worlds and characters. Music composition and artistic creation would remain almost exclusively human domains, without AI tools for generating art or synthesizing complex musical pieces. The philosophical debate around what is consciousness or what is intelligence would continue, but without the immediate pressure of a rapidly advancing AI, it would remain primarily an academic or philosophical discussion, not a looming societal question. Humanity would reaffirm its unique intellectual position, perhaps fostering a stronger sense of shared human endeavor and responsibility. Creativity would be seen as an inherently human trait, not something replicable by machines. This could lead to a greater emphasis on human artistic expression and a flourishing of new human-centric art forms. The collective human narrative would not be shadowed by the potential obsolescence of human intellect. The very narratives we tell ourselves about our place in the universe would differ. Our understanding of intelligence would remain firmly anthropocentric, seeing it as a uniquely biological phenomenon. In this alternate history, the promise of artificial intelligence remains largely unfulfilled for decades. It's a world where human intellect, for better or worse, holds undisputed dominion over complex problem-solving, and the machines that think remain a distant dream, or perhaps a cautionary tale of overreach. This isn't a story of humanity being outsmarted, but of a path not taken, a future where the digital revolution focused on connection and calculation, rather than cognition. What do you think? Would a prolonged AI winter have ultimately been a good thing, forcing humanity to rely more on its own intelligence, or would it have significantly hampered progress across countless fields? Share your thoughts in the comments below.